and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I was used to Rob starting. We'll call the Alternative Energy Committee meeting together.
Recording in progress.
So the main reason that we suggested to have this meeting is because now there are 3 large-scale or industrial-scale solar projects that have reached the point where they've been granted a permit. Now, the question we have is, while we're not involved in the permit review, is where are we going to stand when it comes to pilot negotiations with the town? Should we be talking to the respective taxing jurisdictions and trying to see if they want us to be involved, or they're going to go, in case you didn't know, there's 2 you can go real property tax law to get an exemption where they negotiate with the town, the village, the school, and the county separately, or they can come to the IDA and negotiate, and we would negotiate a deal with the concurrence of the taxing jurisdictions. So there's been several cases where going the 487 route has created issues in line with the project, and there's actually a project in Adams where they won't be paying any town or county taxes because they negotiated the pilot directly with the village and left everybody else out to hang. So the first question I think we should talk about is, do we want to have a meeting with taxing jurisdictions to be ahead of the curve for if and when they come to us for a pilot agreement? The furthest along I can see is Borlex, which is in Hounsfield and Watertown. The other 2 just received approval in December or early January.
What are the other 2?
Tracy, which is in Orleans and Clayton, and Riverside, which is in Lime and Brownville, isn't it?
Tracy is.
They don't-
DEF, right?
They don't have permits yet.
They have the permits, but they haven't got the approvals to proceed yet.
So they've gone through the first phase.
I believe, see, and this is where
I'm not sure the Limes has been, they actually have their permit yet.
oh, well,
I don't think they do.
they were listed in the governor's release.
Okay, just,
Marshall?
Yes.
Will you let Justin?
Yes.
Greens Corner's been approved.
Yes.
Tracy's been approved. Riverside Solar has a permit.
okay.
Now, I don't understand exactly what happens. Reading the permit, you almost got to be a Justin type because it's a lot of legalese referring back to, but they talk about approval to proceed. So I believe they have to submit actual construction design documents and other things, the formal contracts to justify that they're complying with the permit conditions would be my guess. So
Justin, do you know that distinction? So we've got 3 utility scales that have gotten the first permit approval from ORES. But do they next need to submit plans to be able to get approval to proceed? Do you understand how that process is working?
Typically, the first ORES approval will have a litany of conditions attached to it. Among those being general design sets, construction sets. I've got one right now in Union County that has 200 conditions attached to it, including detailed host community agreement provisions for the town. They actually have to go to FERC because of their size and scale. They're 200 megawatts.
Right.
So there's usually, when they get through this first round of ORES approvals, there's like a year of stuff that they got to plow through to get ready for actual construction, if not more. So it's good to see them clear the major hurdle, but there's generally a lot of work to be done between here and get ready to build.
Is there another step in the approval process from ORES though, after this initial?
I think they have their defined conditions with the ORES board, and then I think staff manages checking all the boxes. If there's other regulatory approvals like FERC or any other agencies, then if they got to spin out to DEC or if they need to spin out to, the Army Corps or FERC or something, then they're going to have to deal with those other agencies on a sequential basis, probably.
Maybe that notice procedure probably when they checked off all the boxes.
So Justin, In that project that you're reviewing, have they at this point normally negotiated the pilot agreements before this point?
That one, just so you know, it's one of your clients or your beneficiaries, NextEra. They got through the ORA's approval late last year, and they're just now starting to have conversations with the IDA, the town, and they've met with the school districts, and they're in the midst of some of the conversations that you guys have been seeing over time with people have an opinion on how things should all shake out, and folks are trying to get together and kind of coordinate the path forward.
So the fact that we've had none make an actual application to us, or as far as we know, have formal discussions with the town if they were going to do a 487, is not out of the realm of reality on how they proceed? Do you think it's normal that we haven't heard from them?
They're probably waiting to see the outcome of the 487, or not 487, but the assessment litigation like everybody else. Things of this scale typically want certainty, no matter what the assessment formula is, to a pilot. Dave and I swapped notes on this the other day, and he reminded me that anything above 20 megawatts is going to require affirmative consent. So I'm not sure if there's some gauging of whether the affirmative consent requirements is just as daunting as a 487 approval, or what. But it can't hurt to reach out to them and certainly stay in touch with each town that's impacted to see where they are, or what they've heard, if anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's part of the answer to your original question, Paul, whether we should be meeting with the taxing district, because if we need their approval for deviation, then we might as well meet with them up front to kind of see what their support level or interest is.
Well, I went out of order of our agenda here because I wanted to get to that point first because of what occurred with Lime Central School District. You know, and John, you don't know, Lime Central School District, the project was a mess from the get-go. The developer wasn't cooperating, and then he tried to negotiate a separate deal with the school away where it would be, they'd make a payment to the Northern New York Community Foundation that they could, it was a scam to get around the tax cap, okay? So they wanted to do a small pilot with us, the school did, and they were gonna make this large contribution to a not-for-profit to manage the money from where they could draw it from that. So we washed our hands, said we weren't getting involved with it. And since Lime has the same superintendent, the concern is now we have a huge, this was 4, or is it 5, Marshall, in Lime? It was 4 or 5 small community solars. This is going to be a large industrial. And our concern is what are we going to do if the same type of scenario is proposed for Riverside? And that's why I think it makes sense to try to get whether all 3 projects principals together at once, or taxing jurisdictions, or try to do one, try to meet just individually with the project and the taxing jurisdictions to get a handle on what they want. Are they going to go 487?
Can you explain to me 487?
487 is a New York State exemption that you either can opt in. Well, you can't opt in. You're naturally in unless you opt out.
As a municipality, you're in.
Has been every taxing jurisdiction.
Right.
Currently in Jefferson County, every school district has chosen not to grant the exemption. A bunch of towns haven't, like Orleans doesn't, Clayton doesn't. So unless they rescind that local law opting out, the only way they can be party to any tax pilot agreement is through the IDA. What happened in Lime is Lime was going to, at the beginning of the meeting, rescind their resolution, approve the pilot, then reestablish the resolution after they did. Am I saying that correctly?
I think so.
They were going to,
This was the Lime School Board?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, and that's further complicated by the fact that this, there's a a 60-day prior notice requirement that they tell you of their intent to proceed with a project. If you don't tell them you want to pilot in 60 days, they're exempt.
Correct.
So the village and the town failed to do that. So they're getting nothing for 15 years from this project.
This is the smaller one.
The smaller one in the
Yeah,
town line.
there's 4 or 5 megawatt projects on them.
And that project is built and energized now.
Yes, I know. Okay.
And the county is in the process of figuring out how to get to the taxation out of it now because they did respond to it.
Okay.
And the school's getting full taxation because that deal fell apart.
And my assumption is, I mean, the county responded, you haven't heard back from them, that without pushing anything, they're basically subject to full taxation of the county, I would think.
Well, there's a different opinion. I have a totally different opinion that you're exempt. The only way you can get taxation out of a project is through a pilot agreement, which was never negotiated. You can require them to enter into a pilot for full taxation.
Correct. And we
So-
haven't pursued it.
It's being worked on. So the question I've had is, what are we going to do if the school starts asking for some real weird anomaly scenario?
Yeah,
As
just
part of
new
this
to
project.
Yeah. Are you seeing some more of this around the state, these school districts looking for these educational contributions as opposed to?
I'm seeing them generally spawned by one particular law firm.
The same one here.
Who has been worked with a number of school districts that are represented by one common law firm, a different one. And it's largely, I call it kind of a paper tiger, if you will. It's the tax cap calculation, and you're uniquely familiar with it, having reversed your renewable energy pilot schedules that satisfy some of that same concern, the transition from tax exempt to taxable, and how the revenue is going to impact their growth factor and tax cap calculations, some 16, 17 years into the future. The concern being, they may be borrowing for some school buses and the referendum will fail because of the 2% tax cap, bringing in new real revenue. In my mind, that's simple messaging sometime in the distant future, as opposed to something that should push a major contract today. Or, to Paul's point, creating this artifice that seems legally dubious. To answer your question, it's out there, it's a concept. I try to steer away from it because it clouds and confuses the basic pilot conversation we're trying to have up front.
And I think Paul is right, even though it may be a different firm, a different attorney, it's still the same school district that's may try the same game.
Well, so is it possible that we could write a pilot where we do nothing with the school and only do it for the town and the county? And if the school cuts their own deal under the terms of 487, then we only do a pilot? I think the big holdup for me is we're going to do a little bit here for the school, and we were tied to something I think that was fundamentally wrong, which was finding a way to get around the tax cap issue.
Yeah, well, there's some confusion on that front as well. At the core of it, the assessor can't hit 2 exempt buttons at the same time. The IDA exempts all ad valorem taxes, does not exempt special districts. So once we're involved, we exempt everything.
But
And then our pilot contract dictates what's paid.
okay.
Under the law, we have to distribute pro rata unless the taxing jurisdiction shall otherwise agree. So theoretically, we could go through our process, and because it's a deviation, we got to go get a consent. We could have that consent from each taxing jurisdiction also agree to a non-pro rata distribution formula, which in theory could have no dollars distributed to the school district for whatever deal we strike. And they could have something on the side. It's no different than a town host community agreement, which is a more traditional and legally enforceable model. All things being equal, the way that the UTEP is drafted looks very similar to several others that we helped with. It has a very innocuous statement in it that says, well, we shall take into account any host community agreements that may be required by a host town. Well, what does that mean? If you know a host town, let's just say on a major industrial scale project, theoretically and hypothetically, that the all-in number is 7,000 per megawatt plus land taxes. And that last statement's got its own issues associated with it, but let's just say you're sitting on 7 all in and the town wants 2. Well, guess what? The pilot says 5. And if there's a deal amongst the taxing jurisdictions that says something different than pro rata, you could distribute differently, but they all need to agree by resolution to whatever non-pro rata distribution is agreed to.
So that would work.
You gotta get the permission under your UTEP for anything over 20 megawatts as well.
See, I could see where that's something I personally could support, provided that we aren't divvying up the pot to the school when they have this huge outlay. So that might be a way to look at the Riverside project.
Right. So 2 elements I'm thinking of here. One is so in most cases, these host community agreements are pretty much there primarily to benefit the town. Isn't that what you suggest? Just because the town gets such a small portion of the pilot? So we're seeing, at least when I'm talking about some of the other IDAs I spoke with around the state, I think, Justin, you've seen this too. Some of the IDAs saying we're targeting an all-in number, and we basically are gauging our pilot based on what they negotiate for a host community agreement, and then you kind of do the balance. Others are staying totally out of the negotiation of host community agreement, leaving it up to town. Others are involved in it and making it part of their collection. So I think one of our questions is, do we want to have a number that we're willing to adjust so there's an all-in number, or do we want to set this is the minimum we're going to accept for a pilot? What we did to accommodate the school district in place with Convol and DigiCollect, which was deviation, was the county adjusted its collections. It's the same pro rata in the end over the 20-year period, but the county is willing to say, okay, we'll take less so the school can take more early on. Then toward the end, the school takes less, or the county takes more. And then it kind of helped the school obtain that same result. That at the end there was less of a jump in the tax levy because they were decreasing their collection. So we could accommodate something like that.
Quick question, Justin, so IDA and the real property tax law allows you to enter into a pilot as long as it doesn't exceed what would normally be taxed, correct?
That's right.
Is a host community agreement have to be added into that, would be considered taxation, or is that an agreement outside of that? So let's assume we agree they're going to pay full taxes. Is the host community agreement on top of full taxation? Or is it
It's
part?
not a pilot contract, so it's outside the GML. It's
Okay.
a contract between the town and the developer. The IDA is not even a party to it.
So it doesn't affect, let's say we agree that $7,000 megawatts, right? And we do the pro rata distribution and the county's getting their fair share of the 7,000, their pro rata. Don't worry, Bill, I'm not saying that's the number. Do we care what a host community agreement would be with the host community if everyone's getting what they want? Is that something because in the past, host community agreements were saying, we're going to pay $7,000, but we're taking $5,000 of that, giving it to the host community. So you other taxing jurisdictions only collect 2. Okay. That is where a lot of the rub would be. So if we come to a fair pilot payment agreement, and there's another agreement outside of that, to me, Bill, you can kick me under the table. As long as everyone's getting what they had hoped to get out of the pilot, do we care if the town's getting a little more? I don't know the answer. That's going to be.
That's really the intent of those.
Yeah, that's the intent of it. That's the way, for instance, up in Canton, that's the way it's working up there. There's Rich Road Solar, which is a 94C project.
To negotiate an all-in 7, and that's, the conversation starts and stops with as much as the developer can pay without placing the project at risk. And that therein lies the delicacy of the negotiation. But if the all-in number is fairly in an arm's length determined to be 7, and the town wants 2 in their contract, you're left with 5. And then if you're gonna distribute pro rata, the town might end up with 1, county ends up with 1, and the school district gets 3. So at the end of the day, the town gets 3, the county gets 1, and the school gets 3. That's very common. But where you have different expectations, for example, that include the county wanting full taxes, whatever the heck that means. And then a school district that may want, outside of all of that, a separate and apart education contribution agreement, whatever that means. It just, those factors tend to blow up a somewhat stable HGA and pilot conversation. And you're still starting with the finite blood from pounds and grand a megawatt, right? So I just don't know how many times you can slice a finite apple. And that's just being fair to everybody, including the developer. So if the town has an HDA agreement that involves revenue paid annually over time, there's a pilot agreement that requires revenue paid annually over time, and the school district separately wants a big one-shot up front, it's gonna change the entire conversation. Your admin fee is always a factor in your admin. So it's generally, in my experience, better to have the IDA and the town kind of serve as the center of the discussions with the developer, and then work with all the constituent communities and school districts closely, so there isn't, without naming the developer name, there isn't that line example where everyone's in a different silo, speaking different languages and talking about different expectations and not being able to find common ground. The IDA can serve, I think, as a central clearinghouse, if you will, or a kind of a quarterback on this, and hopefully land on something that's as simple as possible.
Well, we had a meeting at the county a couple months ago, and the county's position as of now, without seeing a final project and seeing how it's gone through there, did not seem willing to change their position on these industrial scale facilities. So that also tells us we need to see what the final valuation model coming from the state is, so you can see what those numbers will be.
Yeah, then the county knows what it's giving up or not.
Yeah, I can respect the expectation, I understand it. But where you have a variable pilot requirement, like full taxes just for the county share, you don't have a certainty in a pilot. It's gone already. So that's not attractive to the developer or any lender or any business plan that is primarily seeking certainty. And then you go to the next step. Well, you're gonna have a variable amount required to be paid to the county every year that's reflective of full taxes. That may just take the 7,000 off the table. I don't know. That may be 10,000 already.
Well,
So,
see, my belief is that based on what we saw in the original models is the value is going to drop every year on these projects. But I always assumed the county was looking to figure out what full taxation is and then doing a defined payment type arrangement where it's the same amount, but they want to get to that number initially.
Right.
But if you look at the model and put it out, every year, they're going to depreciate the model. The higher interest rates are going to push the value down. So unless there's a huge increase in the wholesale cost of power, an income approach to value or discounted cash flow is going to drop those values annually. So like this Adams project, they're almost bouncing off full taxation now just for the village. So
if like in our case, the county's gonna stick to their 100% and it may come back to the state stepping in with their model, with the state determining taxation and maybe outside of a pilot scenario at that point in time, will towns be viable to do an outside host community agreement outside of that structure down the road?
So a lot of towns now have solar laws, and most of those, if not all of them, have a requirement that the developer negotiate a host community agreement with the town, separate of any
Pilot?
The way it's working with the large project in Canton, the town of Canton, is that the IDA, at this point, the pilot is being negotiated through the IDA. It's being negotiated at a $5,000 per megawatt level. With my understanding is at this point, I don't think there's any variation of the allocations. And the town is now at a point where they've negotiated somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,500 per megawatt for their host community agreement to make them whole, their chunk. But the two agreements are separate. It's all being done through the IDA, and the developer actually has done most of these negotiations prior to them even submitting their permit application, which is going to be done very shortly. So there's been discussions all through the early development of that.
That was utility scale or was it smaller scale?
No, it's a 220 megawatt.
Okay, all right.
Oh, yeah.
I go back to when it was Geronimo. And we had that presentation and they had a town supervisor tell them that they were getting like 3/4 of the allocated funds, and the school and the county were getting next to nothing. And that's what really, I think, drove the whole issue on host community agreements. And the towns were getting money in lieu of the taxing jurisdictions. So that's what I think drove a lot of that conversation. So I really think we're at a point where until the state finalizes their valuation, one, we can't even come up with our economic justification on how much we're giving them. That whole process, you got to figure out what we're giving up and what the taxing jurisdictions are giving up. And then it'll be easier for the taxing jurisdictions to understand what they're doing. Orleans has no tax rate, right?
Right. Not for the
Okay.
town.
Clayton has $2, couple bucks. And town of Watertown has none. Hounsfield is just under 2, I think.
Amelia has none.
So, but that doesn't mean if you do a distribution, a prorated distribution in 5 years, if a town has a tax rate, and we talked about this with Orleans with the first Oya projects, then they get a slice of the pie. So.
What's your feeling on the Canton project? Do you think that the state's gonna end up settling that distribution, tax dollars or payments?
I don't think so. There's been no discussions on that yet.
I don't think
But
the
it's early
state-
in the process.
I don't think the state has
Yeah.
a dog in the taxation fight other than what the value is. What's happened, and I think Justin's mentioned it in past meetings, some assessors go out and they use cost as a way to value it. So you have a $120 million project that they're putting $120 million on it because that's what it costs to build. But if you look at the income stream, it's not going to be worth that. And I don't believe the cost is a fair way to value these. So, but the state made some, this Borlax is projected at about 120 million. The latest valuation puts the first valuation model put it in the 80s million. The second one dropped it down into $53 million. So who knows? All the state's got to do is come out there and just play with those numbers and how they're applied, and they can force the valuation down.
And at those figures though, why would you think a lot of those developers would that undercut evaluation? Doesn't it bump it out of the pilot? We'll pay full taxation. We'll be happy with that.
I have no idea. We haven't heard from them.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing that the pilot does provide, as just mentioned earlier, for some of these folks, is over that 15-year period, or 20 to 30 in some other counties, it provides them that certainty, of the expense over time. Right.
Which if they're gonna sell the project, which that's the cycle, they're gonna be sold at least twice during that period. And that's where the predictability of those tax payments is a saleable item.
So until we get an application, it's really premature to have a discussion about whether host community agreements and full taxation. I still think it makes sense to bring the taxing jurisdictions in this early to say, listen, this is what we're here to do. This is how we can help you. Or if you want us out of the picture, tell us now and we'll get out of the picture.
And I think, assuming the county stays with wanting the equivalent full taxation, I think I'm guessing, Bill, where the county might be flexible is that to provide that certainty, we take a snapshot of what is full taxation at X point in time. And we just use that figure as a fixed figure over the life of the pilot. So they're getting roughly the equivalent full taxation. That I would think.
Well, we can also put the onus on the developer to go sell the county on why it's important to do the pilot at a different scenario.
That was true too.
You know, I come from the county and live there, so I don't think it's incumbent upon us to tell the county you should take less. I think it's up to the developer to prove to the county that this is good at this level. I mean, I don't think anyone's here interested in imposing a pilot, are you?
No.
Never done it
Said
before.
we're not going to.
So imposing as a pilot is where we ignore everyone, go through correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, you have to hold a public hearing, then you can just do the pilot?
For which, I'm sorry.
There is a process where first off, we're not gonna do it. Is there a process where you can impose a pilot with our UTEP?
Not as a deviation.
I'm not understanding, well, you have a process where someone applies to you and you consider approval of a project, and that involves a public hearing. And then generally the project will close on a pilot that's consistent with your UTEP. What do you mean by impose?
Well, listen, I've never seen it. I've heard it talked about here about where even if the taxing jurisdictions agree, there was a process where you could go forward and just approve the pilot without their approval. I don't think we'd ever do it, so I'm probably wasting everyone's time.
No, so
That's
clarify.
what we do now.
Yeah, our
Right
standard-
now, anything under 20 megawatts, we can do unilaterally. We don't have
Okay.
to go to get anybody's permission.
Yeah, and we don't seek permission, right?
Your UTEP has a threshold, if it's over 20 megawatts, we go back to the old days where we gotta go out and ask permission for that.
Okay,
And so far, in our county jurisdiction, all the 20 megawatts, nobody's raised a stink about where we're at this point in time, and we've got how many projects?
too many.
I don't know,
A bunch. I mean, we stubbed our toe early on with the first set of projects. We fumbled through those because they were new to us, but the rest of them have gone fairly smoothly. So does everyone feel we should try to meet with the taxing jurisdictions earlier before we get an application so we know?
Well, I think so.
I think too, we may want to be thinking, as I said, a lot of these ideas, they're setting a target for like an all-in number max,
Mhm.
basically based on whatever the town can go and they see to subtract that from their all-in number. You can negotiate it. In some cases, I think they're, in many cases, doing, I think they're going quite low on what they're, expecting for a pilot from the developer. So we might want to look at a number. And I think Justin, I think Schuyler County might do this. If they set like a bottom line number that they'll accept, I think you work with Schuyler County, you or not? Judy Cherry?
Judy was looking for 7 and 8, and I think largely she landed around 6 to 6,500, and there may have been some host community agreements outside of that. So she was a little higher than scale at the time, this was a few years ago.
Right, okay.
Everyone right now, you're about 4 years of maturity into most of your early pilot schedules at 5,500. Probably time to start thinking about having people go in at 6+.
Yeah, I was thinking
Because
that too.
you got projects paying that and they're not shutting down because 6,000 is so painful.
So it's currently at 55.
Right now, so our basic structure is, for anything under 20 megawatts is, about 5,500 per megawatt with a 2% annual escalator.
Mhm.
And then that's the payment schedule, then we invert the schedule, so they start making highest payments first.
and then make the lower payments at the end and flip it. And that's, again, the school district worry about when it comes off the
State aid.
pilot at the end. This way they're gradually increasing tax levy. At the end of the pilot, and I think, as Justin, I agree, it's more of a messaging responsibility of the school districts, but rather than try to explain, which I understand, it's hard to, clarify things to taxpayers. Explain why your tax levy is going up, but your taxes really aren't. It's like, yeah, right, I believe you. But it's
Well-
not true, because now this project's coming on paying full taxation, but.
There's two ways to deal with it, messaging or getting the state to realize that their tax cap is
Yes.
creating problems and they need to find a mechanism to amend that,
Yeah.
to take that into account.
that
You
would
know,
be best.
when you're talking $3 million coming on it in a $400 million school district, that's dust in the wind. But we'll be talking about 20% of their evaluation growing by 20% in 1 year. And then all of a sudden, it becomes a messaging. I think they got 15 years to work it out. So I think it's up to the School Boards Association to force the state to change it, or they're gonna have problems with these projects.
It's also important to note that your reversal of pilot schedule has had your pilots going in at the equivalent of 7,000 plus because it's flipped.
Yeah.
They're paying it.
Yeah.
So 7,000 in year one, they're paying it. So it's, keep an eye on that too. You're actually getting a break later on, after the project's mature and stabilized, so, with that reversal.
So I think I hear that we should pick a project
Yep.
that, we've met with Tracy. They seem to be, is it Tracy we had the meeting with, or was
Yes,
it Riverside?
Tracy, yeah, that's EDF Renewables, that's the company.
I
But
think
at
we-
this point right now, the Boralex project was the first one out of the gate for state approval. But where are they in their ability to put that energy into the line with their agreement with National Grid? Who's gonna get into the line first if both Tracy and Boralex were built out this year?
I think they're both hitting different transmission or substations, because Tracy's going right on the main line that goes to Syracuse. That Tracy, Borlex is going on right along 81 on that main transmission corridor.
But
Well,
have they reserved, like in their build out, do they know when they're fully built out, they can operate at 100% of capacity and feed that line?
No one's guaranteed that.
Well, but they have to have that agreement with National Grid, right?
Yes, they do.
Well,
Do they have it?
I believe that that's required, yes.
there
At
was,
100% or at 50%?
well, it's like this. I asked Bill, there's an email went around about the interconnection queue. That's where all these projects get on
Yeah,
a list.
and that was helpful. That was a good one.
And Bill did some research, and correct me if I'm wrong, that where they are in the queue is just the day they applied. You could be at 220 and be on the line before somebody at 110 if everything works out correctly.
Just based on the date.
All right, so I misunderstood that. I thought that was prioritized.
No.
But I've also got Jerry Hanlon at National Grid trying to find out more information internal to National Grid. This is ISO connection.
Mhm.
But there's got to be an interaction with National Grid too, and he's trying to find out if there's some information there that would kind of point us in the direction of which one of these is going to be the first one.
That's what I'm getting at, is because that's, as far as picking who's on first and who's on second, I
Well-
think that's gonna be,
And the other thing that, we had a meeting there a year ago when National Grid came in and talked to us.
I
And
wasn't
basically what they said at that time is there was room on the line for one of these projects, one of these three. That no way with the infrastructure that's in place today that all three of these would be able to. One of them.
and when EDF was here in the last 12 months at a meeting, their representative that said if things go according to plan, they were looking at energizing 50% of the output was all that they could get into the line in the next, whatever, year and a half. Even though they built it out, they were only gonna be able to put half of what
Yeah, we talked about that and they basically said, well, we'll wait.
Yeah, they were gonna build it and feed it at 50% till they could push it down the line. Is that right? That's what they said, right? The guy sat right here and
It's
said.
interesting.
Well, on the
Haven't heard
agenda,
that from a developer at this point.
there were a couple things to help towns out that I thought we should ask for in our if we ever get an application, we should ask them if they have an interconnection agreement and if they paid the interconnection fees yet, because that's a threshold for certain things.
That was my suggestion when you were looking at that, developing that list. Should be part of our
So-
application.
When we do reviews for the community scale projects, that's one of the requirements before they're given, permission to build, to
The
construct.
site plan approval,
Exactly, and that's one of the requirements is they gotta submit their interconnection agreement, signed, sealed, and delivered and paid for. Or they don't start the project.
Yeah,
but is
that's
it
probably
there at the
standard
time of the
requirement.
approval, or is it a contingency they can meet later?
It's a contingency they can meet later, because it's a conditional site plan approval.
Okay.
But they
Well, they
can't
can't-
start constructing until.
I think it's a pretty standard approach.
It is.
So we may not need to require it, but I mean, we certainly.
Well, I think we should ask. And the reason I
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
is
yeah,
it's an
yeah.
important factor for
Oh, yeah.
those small projects with the state's exemption that they're considered under construction once they paid for their interconnection agreement, which means that you can't try to opt out of it and keep them from getting an exemption, okay? But that's why those two things were there. It's as much I think we have to look out for the towns. We already have several towns that aren't getting money out of this because they failed to comply with
60
487.
day.
You know, we've sent out how many notices, we've held seminars on that. And yet they send it to the town clerk who throws it over there and 3 months later it pops up and they're,
Does that exempt them from entering into a host community agreement?
no.
No,
Right, which is why I think a lot of the towns are maybe lax in that regard, just their whole intent
No,
is.
I don't think it's just
Yeah.
clear oversight.
Really?
Not understanding.
yeah, it is oversight, it has been oversight, but it's now
It doesn't sound like.
clearly
yeah,
understood.
It doesn't
Coming
sound
from the
like.
taxation world, seeing one of these projects not paying taxes just grates me the wrong
Yeah.
way. You know, the Shimo project's like 40 grand to the county if we can get them on the roll at 50%.
Well, school district too, that educational contribution was contingent on them getting a pilot, which they haven't gotten, which means now they're subject to full taxes.
And they paid them this year too.
So yeah, they're not prevented from doing a host community agreement, but if they miss that notification, they basically, once the community's the project's gotten that automatic exemption, the town doesn't really have a lot of leverage unless.
Sure.
Unless the developer.
I will tell you, in the village of Adams, they missed it, however, the developer,
That's the town missed it.
what's that?
The village
The
missed it.
village missed it. However, the developer said, we'll make an exception here, we'll be more than happy to.
They should have made an exception for all the taxing jurisdictions.
Yep.
And I will bring that up when AES comes in for Riverside. You know, they're skipping out over the town. What incentive would there be for the county to give any relief to Riverside when they pulled that crap in Adams? So, much smaller project, but they're a lot nicer people at the county now than.
Well, the basically paying the village, the equivalent of what we would. charge.
Yeah, they could have gotten all 3 taxing jurisdictions for what they paid the village.
Mhm.
So, but that's all that's on our agenda, unless someone else has any questions about any of those items. Bill just showed us we now have a wind project proposed in Rutland.
2 of them,
These are new ones?
same company, 2 different places.
Would you mind if I took a look?
Are you Rutland too?
No.
These are new ones or ones we already had on the list?
No, that came to me yesterday.
New leaf. Are they both new leaf or?
Does it say how big they are?
They don't,
How many towers?
Let's see.
doesn't say anything.
Doesn't say about
Just says-
megawatts.
It's the 60-day notice
Yeah,
required
Were these wind
notification.
or solar?
Wind,
wind,
Oh,
but there's a solar proposal at the same place that it's on the list here that Rutland
Arrays.
Center. Rutland Center Solar, it's right in the general same area and the same developer. It's set-
Put the solar panels around the wind towers.
Yeah.
The shadow flicker will do.
Yeah.
Well, they've been signing leases in Rutland, right, though, for solar?
For solar,
Yeah. I believe it's this company.
same company, yeah.
ED Tracy's in.
They don't file those. I think they're filing, what is it called, when you're getting, if everything goes forward, we have a lease. It's an option.
Yeah.
And they haven't, I haven't
The
seen
town
any of
has
those
got
filed at the
That
county.
same notice, all the taxing jurisdictions should have got that same notice.
They should have, yeah.
And I think we should make them aware to look for that notice so they
Well, I
send
know
us.
Gary Eddy, he was on this point last time because, the one that went through that we did, with what little bit they'll be getting out of the pilot. And, so they'll probably push to get a host community agreement on this one, I'll bet.
The other thing I looked into for you, Paul, was you were asking about building permits. And the county, Jason says, the solar projects don't need a building permit, but the way he understands it, if there's a storage battery associated with it, that does require a permit. And I think it's based on the fire suppression system that's part of that storage.
I just see if they make that application for that permit, we know, and we haven't heard from them, we know that project's moving forward. Why, it'd be nice to know if any permits are filed for that, so we.
It's only according to that.
So the
only
town
for
is storage
storage.
permit for, for the review process.
For the smaller ones, everything's done at the town level. These larger ones, it's the state making the final
It's the
determination.
94C process.
Yeah.
Yes.
But according to Hochul's new initiatives, isn't every one of the 100+ megawatt have to have that 20% battery storage built out as part of it?
I saw that, I can't answer
I
that
think that's a
question.
goal. I don't know that that's a requirement right now.
And these ones that already been approved, how do you add that additional
Yeah,
requirement on them?
Exactly. I know Ridge Road and Canton does have storage, a component of storage.
Didn't Oya end up with storage on one of those
Supposed to have.
projects?
I think so, yeah.
So John, now that you're the new guru,
I don't think so.
You're in the thick of it.
so coming out of today, we're going to try to set up a meeting.
We've talked to Tracy Borland. We've actually had a lot more communication over time with Borland. I mean, not recently, but they might be a good one to start with.
It'd be nice if they were just in one town.
That's-
I mean, the last time we dealt with TI Central and Lafarge, the superintendent said, if it wasn't for the tax cap, we would have signed this and gone to lunch already. Because they saw it as free money, but now with the tax cap, you gotta account for pilots. So I would like to start with Tracy. We have a relationship. We've talked to them before, one on the taxing jurisdictions. We've met with them in the past. They were tough. Unless someone wants to think differently.
It's a good start.
I just think we've met with the town, the school districts. And so they've been in this room and we've talked about this, where they want to go. And that might make a place to start, to see how if we're going to have one that goes bad, it'll be there.
So Paul, you're talking, just for clarification for the minutes, meeting with Tracy, the company first? Or
No,
bringing
the taxing jurisdiction.
With them,
We'll set a
or
meeting in
without
tax
them?
jurisdictions.
I know.
Without the
Without
developer.
the developer.
without the developer.
But what I will do in the meantime, I'll reach out to Tracy and say, hey, so just kind of I'll get at least a feeling for what is their timeline currently. So, just-
It might not hurt to reach out to Borlex as well,
Yeah.
because I think it's a toss-up.
Yeah. The only thing is, I noticed in reviewing some of the filings that Clayton raised a whole lot more concerns about the Tracy project than Orleans did. So I don't know what you might hear from Clayton. Most of that was about decommissioning, just so you know. Any questions or additional items for today? Have I forgotten anything, Dave?
I think so.
John, Ed?
Just my observation that it's like, my God, the freight train is revving up. It's coming down the tracks.
Yes, it is. By the way.
Hey, Rob, quick, while I've got a bunch of you here, in terms of the whole, my question about spec building pilots, do we want to put that on the agenda for discussion, or do you not see any need to discuss it at the board meeting?
We've gotten two of our 7 board members, if we're talking IDA, and 3 of 11. So, I mean, it's not a majority that said no, so let's put it on there and kind of debate it, right, once and for all.
I just worry about the concern.
Yeah.
So we approve a spec building, then a use comes in that doesn't fall within the eligibility